Hi, Deb. It's my pleasure to introduce Deb Azorski, and Deb is a beloved supervisor and friend of mine. She has a private practice in Boulder, Colorado, and works with couples and individuals. And she specializes in the topic area of sexuality and relationship. She's for a long time, you taught at Naropa, no longer, but today we're going to be talking a little bit about and she's also a supervisor of mine, which is so exciting to have her here today. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about secrets and affairs. So a little bit of a juicy topic. Mm-hmm. So welcome, Deb. Thank you
Thank you, Jenna.
for coming.
Yeah. It's a great topic, an important topic.
It is, and it's a topic that you and I have talked about in session, and I thought it would be really nice to share some of your wisdom with other people who are engaged in this topic area in general and working with couples in their private practices. So
yes, because it will definitely come up. Secrets and affairs.
Secrets and affairs.
Mm-hmm. You know, Esther Perel says that marriage is jealous of affairs. It's something like that. Like the affairs happen so often and they're so much a part of our culture. And I think that's also a really great, that's also a great conversation. Like, why is that? And how does that happen? That
why do affairs happen?
This monogamous marriage as this pinnacle of what is the best, the gold standard. And yet then all of this other stuff is happening underneath there. I just,
It's fascinating. And there's so many different ways to do relationship. In your practice, do you work with people who are all over the spectrum in terms of different relationship styles?
Yes, absolutely. And it isn't to say that anybody in a non-monogamous relationship or a poly relationship still doesn't kind of stumble with some of the ways of talking about entering a new relationship. It takes time and patience and emotional fortitude, I think, to engage one, two, or three, four people in a conversation about how to bring in new partners. But that's a whole other. And it isn't to say that people in poly relationships don't cheat. So it's, but yeah, I do work with poly couples and find that it often is a topic of conversation, how to introduce a new partner. They just have sort of a knowing, or not a knowing, but just an acceptance that this is a part of the poly world and we will have a conversation about it, as opposed to monogamous relationships where there's sort of this blanket idea that if we identify as monogamous, whether we are consciously identifying or not, the conversation just never gets had about other partners.
It just doesn't happen at all.
No.
And how often would you say?
Fact, I want to say one other thing about that. I want to say it's almost as if an unconscious identity of monogamy sort of implies jealousy. You are, as a partner, you are going to ensure that I feel secure and never threatened by anyone else.
So the one partner is ensuring that for you, like you're ensured that you're going to be faithful in some way, and you're ensuring that I won't feel jealous if you're my partner, for example.
Yes, in an unspoken, unconscious way. I think that's how it works. It's part of like horrific thing on so many levels, because someone has been imagining a particular way of
you're breaking up a little, Deb. I don't know what, like that.
Not on my end.
Okay. All right. Maybe you can repeat that last piece again.
Sure. It's there's an unspoken one of the reasons why we see so much kind of shock when someone discloses they've had an affair is what we find out is that one person was sort of operating in this belief system that, our monogamous relationship is going to ensure that you will never do this and I will never feel jealous and I will always feel secure, even though it's never been discussed.
And one person, it sounds like, is operating from the idea that secrets are inherently part of relationship on some level.
Maybe.
How do
Or
you
that somehow
how do you
secrets are just okay.
that what is that again? The secrets are okay.
They're just okay. I mean, but I've worked with lots of people who are the cheater and I mean, they're racked with guilt and shame. Many of them are. It's not easy. Some of some of those folks' inability to sort of reconcile their guilt and shame also makes it really difficult to maintain the marriage. I've seen that happen too, where one person just like they never in their life imagined themselves as the cheater. And then they find themselves in that position and then they can't reconcile it. And they end up leaving their marriage because they're so kind of devastated by their own shame. It's kind of an interesting.
And so that kind of brings me maybe to this first question related to secrecy, is that you're describing the cheater feelings of shame and being racked with guilt. And I just wonder, how do you work with that within the context of couples work? I'm sure it's probably a little different if you're working with somebody individually than if you're working with the couple. But I just wonder for you, I know there's very different philosophies on how to work with secrecy in the therapeutic relationship. And some people are on this side of you disclose all and some are not. And so I just wonder where you fall therapeutically, like what that looks like for you when you're working with a couple.
Mm-hmm. I do not like to be, I have been put in the position of holding a secret of an affair. How I do my practice, how I do my sex therapy practice is very often I will meet with a couple together, then I'll meet with each person individually, and then I will go back to the couple. So we talk about it as a 2-1-1-2 sort of model at the onset of couples therapy. If something has been disclosed to me in that time, because I will ask the question individually and find out what the information is. It's an important factor. I'd rather know about it ahead of time than have it come out somewhere along the way, which it absolutely has. But when I find that out, I usually work with the individual in that one session to try to get them to understand why they haven't disclosed it. I don't want to be the discloser. I also don't want to be the holder of the secret. I know there are therapists out there that do. I think Terry Real, I think he does a whole talk about it. Like it's confidential. So if you're telling me something, it's confidential. But I find that really difficult to work with a couple, supporting the couple, knowing that this other thing has happened and is a secret. I just, I see where, the person who's holding the secret is withholding. I see where the other partner is upset and frustrated and longing and sometimes even has a feeling that something is happening, like an intuitive feeling, or they just feel like something's off or there's a miss. And I imagine you could hang out with that for a while. But really the work is to have the partner disclose. That's
you let them know that, like in your individual session, that I hear that you're telling me this secret, but along the way, it's beneficial to tell these things to your partner.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, if they're not interested in doing that, if they have too much fear, it might be a good opportunity to refer that person to another colleague so that they can do some individual work on getting underneath sort of what is the mechanism by which they've decided to hold the secret, or they're withholding that information from their partner. I'm not going to do that work. But if I know that they're doing this work with someone else, I imagine that the process will evolve. But it is really difficult. I mean, it's difficult for me. I can personalize that.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to me. It only happened to me once. Um, and, uh, and I remember talking to the client and saying, okay, so here's what we need to do. Then the next couples session, I think it's really an important thing for you to do. And it made so much sense to me about why the couples work had gotten sort of stuck.
Mm.
And it felt like nothing was really happening. And I was so curious about that. And then I did these individual sessions. This was after I'd been with this couple for a while. And I did this individual session, and here comes the information about the affair. Sort of, it was ongoing at the moment that the couples counseling was going on. And so I worked with a client to try to understand why they were afraid. And they were right. Their fear was that my partner's going to leave me. And that did ultimately end up happening. But we went back into the couple session and they didn't say anything about it. And I tried to create sort of a structure that would give them the space to actually like come clean, and they didn't do it. And I'm sitting in the chair thinking, wow, this is not happening now. Okay. So there's a lot of fear there. And no matter how nicely I might package the time and the space, it's not coming out. But so I just sort of like giggled to myself, and then the next session I got a little more bold, and I looked at the client and I said, I'm wondering if there's something you need in order to make it safe to have your voice. And the next week they actually went ahead and disclosed it. So, but it was really an interesting sort of dynamic and process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you're working with someone individually and they disclose to you that they've had an affair, are you also encouraging them in that space to discuss it with their partner? Or is that a very different setup?
I think it's different. I think certainly if you're working with someone individually and they disclose that, you have a lot more time and space to kind of understand the whys,
Mhm.
which I think they're always a really important whys. People just don't do this for no reason.
Mhm.
Um, and I think one of the things I'm really aware of is that most of the literature that's out there, most of the books that have been written on infidelity and affairs often side with the person who's been cheated on. So they can get very, this is very opinionated on my part, but they can get sort of victim identified, and they can get very righteous and self-righteous even in their writing, and about, not to say that someone who has been cheated on isn't suffering a tremendous amount, but the person who cheated also is suffering as well.
Mhm.
And there's not a whole lot of books out there. There's a one or two out there that actually focus on the person who was the cheater to help them sort of understand, because really then the couple's work is deepened when both people have a deeper understanding about the dynamic. It's not a single person issue. It's a couple's issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had, and I kind of want to walk with you through the steps of working with a couple, but I do have a question on this piece because I've definitely been in a situation where we get to the point of the therapy, which is a little bit down the road, where we start to understand the why for the cheater, and it's just blank. It's like, I don't
Yeah.
know. And I'm wondering, some part of me has the feeling like there has to be a reason here. And that's a little bit along the line of what you're saying. But how do you work with that situation when someone says, I don't know why I did it? I
Uh-huh.
just
Yeah.
did it.
Well, I will then sort of introduce some possibilities just to get them sort of thinking.
Mhm.
Sometimes our guilt and our shame sort of um, in, inhibit our ability to sort of deepen our own understanding, right? So I don't know if that's the case, but in when someone says I have no idea, I throw out some of the possibilities. One is like often the example I talk about with folks is, um, you're just going along your day and you're at work or whatever, and somebody pays you attention. Somebody gives you a compliment. Somebody says, wow, you look really great today. And something happens inside you. And it's more than just an appreciation. There's a spark. Sometimes there's grief that comes up. Sometimes there's all different kinds of things, feelings that come up around an experience like that, that then begins to formulate into a why that sounds like, oh, there's a need that's not getting met at home.
Mhm.
There's a need. If someone comes by and starts talking to you, and maybe they are flirting with you, I don't know. I mean, people flirt all the time, but it's how the flirt impacts you,
Mhm.
right? And if it's all of a sudden like feeding someone who's starving, or giving someone a drink of water that's dying of thirst, it becomes this thing that you then lean into.
Mhm.
And then we start to look at, oh, so some of the why is, and there's an unmet need that you may not have even really been aware of until it sort of came in from the outside.
Mhm.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I think what one piece that is so interesting about what you said right before that was related to the way that shame and guilt kind of
Yes.
like hide the why somehow. I
Yeah.
just think that's so interesting because I think there's so much truth in that. And then this formulation might support people in starting to see a narrative. But how do you work with those layers of the shame and the guilt, like
Mhm.
maybe even initially?
Well, it's difficult. That's probably one of the more difficult pieces, because I think it most of the folks I've worked with have a very hard time sort of conceptualizing themselves as a cheater. That's a very difficult identity
Mhm.
for someone to own, and because it is so shamed in our culture. Um, but it is so it does take some time, and it's a process, and sometimes those folks are looking for forgiveness from partner as a means of healing that, but that's kind of like not really how it works. I don't think. um, it's sort of like the external validation or the external forgiveness, um, again, I think just sort of pushes that shame and guilt down even further, like so that the person doesn't have to really reconcile with it. But I do think there's a place of, I have had long conversations with clients around forgiveness. What is self-forgiveness? What does that even mean? I think that's also why the whys can help. If you add some understanding into the action or the act of cheating, um, that can help start to make sense. I remember one client I work with, a gentleman who, when I said he didn't know about the whys, he had no idea. And I said, maybe you got some attention that you hadn't been getting. And he was like, yeah, that was it. And we dove off into this whole thing for him around what it feels like to get attention. And he has so much shame around, he doesn't even think he should need or want that.
Mhm.
So it again, it goes, and then it goes back to, he was this really nice kid growing up, and he was kind of his mom's best friend, and he got a lot of attention, and attention needs met in those ways. Um, but so he could sort of start to understand and sort of heal some of that shame around actually even wanting attention.
Mhm.
Like, for sure, he's like, I'm married, I shouldn't need this kind of attention.
So, okay, so I'm wondering, is this example that you're offering right now, is that related to an individual client or is that in the context of a couple?
That is so one of the models I work with is a co-therapy model
Mm.
where I'm working with this individual, another therapist is working with his female partner, and then the two therapists and the clients get together and the four of us do counseling,
Oh, I see.
couples
So
counseling.
you're able to do the individual depth work and also the couples piece.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's interesting because I think that layer of depth of understanding the meaning and what attention is like, it might be very hard, I imagine, in the context of the couple to do that depth work because something happens where I imagine the person who's been cheating on is like, I don't want to hear about how great it felt to receive attention from X, Y, or Z. And so I
Yeah.
wonder, maybe we could back up a little
Yes.
and just
Exactly.
talk about
Let's
what
talk
happens when a couple enters your office and
about
how
this.
do you start to work with infidelity?
Yeah.
I think for me, when I first came to you related to supervision around this, it really opened my eyes like, oh, there's a process. There's really a kind of journey. And if you really clarify that for the couple up front, it's going to make onboarding them a lot easier and let them know that there's sort of tangible ways that they can relate to this because it can be the most overwhelming thing for a couple to come in and to be relating to this material.
Absolutely. You're exactly right. And what you said, I think is really important is that the couple is often looking to the therapist to um, sort of, it's sort of one of those moments when our knowing of the situation can convey a level of knowledge and calm and confidence that the couple is looking for, because we can imagine, I mean, so Esther Perel talks about crisis, insight, and vision, and about in her new book, State of Affairs, she really breaks all of that down. It's also one of the better books that doesn't demonize the cheater, just as a little plug. Um, but so in this crisis phase, what are people looking for when they're in a crisis? They are looking for someone to bring calm. They're looking for someone who has knowledge that can help the nervous system begin to settle,
Mhm.
right? The couple is frantic, they're devastated, um, depending upon, I mean, all the other factors, how long had been going on, how somebody found out. I mean, all of these things are factors in the crisis.
Mhm.
Um, and all of those factors are really important things for couples to know, that there is a way of getting through all of this. For sure, you have folks that, just want to sort of tear somebody down, which that isn't going to be helpful. People want to know, can their marriage survive it? So they need someone to be able to say whatever the truth might be about that in the moment, which sometimes is, I'm not sure. There's some of the steps that might need to happen in order for us to be able to predict how you two can move through this.
Mhm.
But there are couples who have maintained their marriage, and actually their marriages are stronger um, in light of all of this. So that's also important information to convey to a couple. But really, I think bringing some structure into a crisis can be really, really helpful for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe you could say a little bit about that. Couple comes in, they're in crisis, just found out there was infidelity. How, what steps do you let them know that you're going to be working with them? Like what are the steps? What do you say?
Mhm. Well, the first step is to do one of the trickier steps in the beginning is to try to let's see. Step one is letting them know that if they're coming in together, that you want to be able to hear the kind of the whole story from both of them. that there's plenty of room for their hurt, there's plenty of room for their anger, for both people's anger and upset. I let them know that there are certain things I will not let go on. Expressing anger is fine. Um, Blaming, judging, all kind, things that are
Name calling.
name calling, anything that might set the cheater up to shut down, or I'm going to try and manage that to the best of my ability. So, because I really do, and I let them know that I want both of them to feel like they have the ability to communicate their feelings in a safe way.
Hmm.
So trying to emphasize the role of safety and that I'm going to be watching both of them to notice when somebody looks shut down, and I will pause and I will slow things down. I always let everyone know that I can be quite interruptive. And I don't have any problem with interrupting, especially if I see something that is going into a place that is not in the service of the couple. So that's kind of how it starts. And that I let them know that there's plenty of room for everybody to unpack all that they're feeling. And then there's a place of just validating everybody's emotions.
I have a question about that. So the story starts coming out, and let's say the person who was cheated on has a lot of really active questions, like wants to know details.
Yeah.
How do you work with that? Because I think that can come up often where one person's like, I want to know where you were. I want to know what you were doing. I want da 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 da. And it can be like, it goes into a different direction than the general story. It's just starting to work into some other terrain that almost feels maybe like masochistic on the part of the person who was cheated on, like wants to know. I'm
Yeah,
wondering.
it is. It can be. And yeah, I stop that and I try to assure that person that there is plenty of time for that information. Now is not the time.
Mhm.
I I assure them, I reassure them over and over again that of course those are important questions and of course they are the things that they want to know. But right now, I would say to that person, but right now there's probably something you need more, which is not a boatload of detailed information. And I say that only because I've done this work before. So I try to reassure them that I actually know what I'm talking about. Um, and also validating that yes, at some point in time, you really will want to know the details, maybe. I've also worked with people who don't want to know the details, that they're terrified of the details. But yeah, yeah. And to just let them know that they, like, there's one way when someone is, sort of rapid firing, at you, and there's only going to be a certain number of ways that a person can respond to that, right? They could start lying. That's one way. There could be doing things to try to calm that person down, assuage their own guilt. I mean, all things that ultimately will not serve the couple. So we want to make sure that we don't put someone in that position where they're then feeling sort of like their back's up against the wall. Because what we're really going for is getting to some really difficult truths. So what does it mean to set up an environment with a couple where they both feel safe enough to really speak their truth? That kind of investigative, sort of detailed inquiry doesn't usually work. In some cases, I've worked with a couple where a guy cheated on she wasn't his wife yet. A guy cheated on his female partner, and he like called her the next morning and said, I did this thing. I don't usually drink. I got a little drunk and there was this person there and I ended up sleeping with her. And because it happened that fast, the details, it was easier for the details to sort of come out. There weren't a lot of details. I mean, basically he just got a little too drunk and sort of lost his he just succumbed to the attraction and lost all sense of boundary or partner or whatever. But he was really willing, and under those circumstances, because it happened like the next morning, he called his partner. It was easier for the details to come out because there weren't that many details.
It's different
And
if it's an ongoing situation.
totally different if it's ongoing.
And the
Totally
relationship.
different if it's multiples.
Yeah.
Totally different if how the disclosure comes out. I mean, this was best case scenario, right? He called right away. Hungover, he called.
And he wanted to work on the relationship. I mean, I imagine some people cheat and they're like, yeah, I'm done.
Right.
I don't want to continue anymore.
Some people cheat as a means of exiting. Right, for sure. So that's another important thing to sort of try to tease out.
To get clear about pretty early on in the session, I would imagine. Or
yeah, well, it's really, sometimes it's really hard for someone to actually own. It's really hard, can be really hard for the cheater to own that I really do want out, or my unconscious sort of actions. Right.
Yeah. And so initially you're really supporting the clients and sharing in a paced way. Like, I'm getting that you're slowing people down. You're also working with feeling states that are in the room as they're describing the situation, the cheating itself.
Yeah. Slowing it down. And then I think our role as a clinician is really understanding the dynamics of the infidelity. I think disclosure is really big. And I think how things are disclosed, when they're disclosed. One of the articles that I read years and years ago that made so much sense to me was about a sort of a piecemeal approach to disclosure, like little bit of the time, is really unhelpful. So the hard part for the cheater may be to actually be willing to divulge it all at once, given that the partner can handle it and given that the partner is staying present, maybe in a lot of emotion, but are still able to be present with the information's coming out. Doesn't mean we don't do it slowly, but I think it's more destructive for a couple if there's anything that's withheld, anything previously. And I've had people go all the way back to, I had a married couple that went all the way back to somebody kissed somebody like just like the night before the wedding. And they hadn't ever disclosed that, but it ultimately ended up coming out, which was good. It was hard, but ultimately good. So there is that. It's so much less destructive. You don't want to build trust with someone. You don't want to build trust and then have, oh yeah, then there's this. Oh, but then there's that.
Yeah, it feels leaky or something. It's like there's another piece, there's another piece. It's like, how do you ever find a sense of ground or something?
Right. You can't. And building trust, rebuilding trust is another really pivotal sort of important piece in this. And of course, trust has been betrayed.
So how does that, is that sort of the next piece that you're bringing in is related to trust and finding that stability? Or we were kind of talking about the steps and I realize there's no process that's specifically linear. So
It's
sort of
just not in my world, there's not.
Yeah. So what's the next step, would you say?
So it's about attempting to create safety. It's about defining what safety feels like. It's talking about the issue of trust. These are all in the early crisis sort of phases. What is trust? What I am aware of is that people will say, oh, I trust him or her, or I trust them. And they don't really have an idea of what that even means. So it's unpacking all of these really big concepts so that people can have a more grounded understanding of what they are, We don't just give this thing called trust to someone. Actually, it's earned. And how is it earned? And how is it going to be re-earned in this, in light of this issue?
Can it be re-earned?
Can it be re-earned? And the cheater has to hang out with the fact that, you know, the uncertainty of the, you know, the person who's been cheated on, whether they can actually navigate that. And that's one of the more difficult pieces that just keep, I think it's a thread that continues through the entire process of helping a couple recover, is that so there's an initial, in the beginning, we're talking about trust and what is it and how might it be earned. And then, you know, some level of trust will be established, re-trusting someone again. But then, oh, then something happens and it gets triggered again, or the fear gets triggered again, right? And you might have to come back to that and restate it and reclaim it or refine it in some way, deepen understandings. And that's how it works. So there are all these baselines that get to be established in the beginning phase, unpacking some of these definitions of these big concepts that people are now feeling that have been betrayed in some way. But establish all
That's
that
just like a
allows.
light switch. You don't just flip trust on. Like you're saying, it's this process, and it's like a step forward, a step back. You know, you go to a party and someone's very close to your partner's leg. And what does that evoke for you?
Yes. I had a client the other week who said that he was the cheater. His wife, he was texting with a friend from work, and it was just the guy's initials. It was a guy friend from work or something like that, and it was just initials. And his wife noticed that he was texting with someone and there were just initials, and she went into a panic about it. And he had to come back and he had to show her the text, and he had to reassure her, and it was just her trigger, right? And it's okay. We're not going to judge that, right? It just happens. And the cheater's willingness to come back and reassure and reassure and reassure, and that they get to be emotionally attuned to that. Now, one of the things that also happens that we get to, as we're unpacking all of this, we get to understand some level of trust building. If a significant amount of trust building has already occurred, but the person who was cheated on is still gets super triggered, you have to go back in history to sort of deepen your own understanding about what's really happening. You watch someone reassure, be willing to reassure, be emotionally attuned, show up, but the person who was cheated on continually gets super triggered and doesn't do very well working with it, isn't reassured in a way that sort of drops the energy down. Then you really want to find out what else has happened here. What are the other earlier betrayals? Where's the attachment rupture from from childhood that is making that trust building more difficult? I think that those are really, really important pieces, that it doesn't become just the responsibility of the cheater to resolve these issues. They do their best. They're open and willing. But then there's all this, you know, and I think usually we find a lot of attachment ruptures underneath that, attachment betrayals underneath that these, you know, somebody texting a friend. This one client got triggered. Her husband wanted to watch a movie, really, like, I don't know, some silly comedy. And there was the woman he had cheated on her with was a blonde, and she has dark hair. And she got freaked out because the movie had a blonde woman in it. And she just went off the rails. How could he do this? How could he put on a movie with a blonde woman in it?
So this case, it feels like it can happen. I mean, I'm really appreciating you're bringing in sort of the earlier childhood pieces that might be at play for the person who was cheated on. Is it, and you're also bringing in sort of the co-regulation that can happen within a couple where one partner can be only responsible up to a point, and then it can almost start to feel, I don't want to use the word irrational because I know it's really based in fear and probably based in history.
Mhm.
When that's coming up so loudly in someone's system, do you support them in their own self-regulation in that point, or are you working more as a co-regulator to support them? I'm wondering, like, where do you did name, like, it's not all the responsibility of the cheater at some point. So how do you support the person who's been cheated on in working or starting to identify those things early? Because I think it can happen so fast. Like, it can, like you said, go off the rails. I mean, it goes 0 to 1,000. It's like, really? You saw a toothbrush wrapper in the trash can, and then you thought it was the person's, that, it just turns into this whole narrative that's, so how do you support that person?
Mhm. Well, for sure, one of the ways is ensuring that they have their own therapist and they're doing their own work. They more often than not, those folks are also sort of caught off guard or surprised by their trigger, and they don't necessarily understand it either. And once they can get a bit more regulated, they can sort of start to just even be curious about their own, like, why the hell did I freak out because there was a blonde woman in the movie?
Mhm.
They don't understand that themselves.
Mhm.
So there's one place where I will just always go back to validating sort of whatever the feeling is, right? The fear, more than likely it's the fear or anger that comes up. And then the second part of that is also asking them if they're willing to sort of notice, so what just happened, right? That your partner has been willing to show up, and what happens with that? Does
Mhm.
it not really get through? Is there something that's keeping you from building this trust?
Mhm.
Um, and it is, I mean, there's a deep appreciation for how hard it is to imagine that you can trust your partner again. Um, and a lot of that comes from, it's sort of like this going back. So, what do we know that's happened? So, he's told you the truth. He's answered your questions really willingly. He's leaned into you really lovingly. And so we sort of go over, all of the things that have actually happened in your presence so that you can reassure them,
Mhm.
right? That things have transpired, so that they can start to hopefully settle with it, hear it, remember. Um, and then sometimes I don't know, it's like about just really grieving.
Mhm.
It's like big grief. And lots of times, too, we'll talk about sort of, you know, in those circumstances, we could imagine like never got that opportunity as a kid to talk about their hurt and their pain, especially with a parent who was attentive and attuned and willing to sit with that. Never got to express anger, with a parent who may have not shown up, just shut down. I mean, all different kinds of things that can cause that sort of attachment betrayal, attachment rupture. Um, so it's a reassuring from me to the best of my ability. And it's rebuilding, it's like reconnecting the alliance that I more than likely have already seen, right? And it's just like, yeah, right, these things kind of happen, and it's about bringing that back together again. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got long-winded in that, but
Yeah, but on some level, you're beginning to enter the role of, I mean, you're creating a secure attachment to them additionally. Like, I mean, I'm getting like some piece of the healing is just from attuned listening, being with, staying with, allowing the feelings to be there. And I'm really liking this kind of what you're describing. It's almost like a weaving, like,
yes.
remember we've done this, and remember when this happened, and remember we told a story, and remember, it's like, because I think in those moments it can be so quick to forget, like it's back to the original injury somehow.
And here is our role as a therapist, as a couples therapist. We are holding the story
Hmm.
without emotion. So we have the pieces that can be brought back when emotion shows back up again, right? And the reiteration. It's like this sacred sort of place to be this holder of this story. And really and a really important role, and a calming role, and an honest and a soothing role for anyone to be able to do that. And it's so helpful and so profound, because when the emotions come up, all of that sort of disappears. And so that's really, and I think most of the folks in your class get that on some level, that that's really what we're doing.
Yeah.
We are holding we're holding the pain, we are holding the story, we are holding the desperation, the fear, the loneliness, the anger. We're holding all of that so that we can then, if necessary, bring that back. And that sort of leads into, I want to go back to the steps, but that sort of goes back into this, once you have navigated a lot of the crisis, calmed things down, you've attempted to build some safety. One of the things I do say in this crisis situation is, now that you have me here, let's not talk about this at home so much, because more than likely, it erupts at home and it becomes sort of destructive. So I ask them, you can hug each other, you can cry with each other, but let's not talk, let's save the communication about it for in here, right? For a little bit of time until there's some safety that gets built. So we've been through this whole crisis phase. We've helped people regulate themselves. We've helped them understand how to get regulated themselves. We've helped the cheater learn how to say, I hear your question, and I just want you to know that I'm not sure that this is the right time to tell you. I know that's hard to hear, but I love you. You're important to me. And can we save this for therapy? I mean, all kinds of little narrative cues that can help them navigate the difficulty. Then as you're moving through that, you move into this sort of insight place. This is where we were talking earlier about the whys. This is where we really start to understand sort of the dynamics. And again, I'm always framing it as a couples issue. This is a couples issue. We have to understand, how did the person who got cheated on sort of had a feeling that something was happening and didn't bring it up? What's happening there that you would not trust yourself to speak into, even if you have no idea what's going on? It's just something is happening and I don't know what it is. So I have to talk about it. I have to ask you about it. Like, we want better and better and better and more communication. We want someone to feel that they can validate their own intuition on something when something feels off. Right? We want to know all about that. We want to know why they might have just shoved it in the corner, or why they decided to pay more attention to what's happening with their kids instead of what's happening with their partner. We want to understand all of that, because that's that part of the couples issue, right? And so we're building insights. We're understanding the deeper story about how could this have even happened?
Right. Like, what were the relational contextual pieces that led to it, like behind the scenes? It's almost like, what were the underground dynamics where, yes, maybe one person is pushing their inside away, or there's some reliance I've seen in couples, like a reliance on appearances, like wanting to just appear. And there's such an identity around appearing functional that it's actually the functionality is gone. So understanding some of those relational undercurrents, the insight there. Is this where the why related to why the person cheated initially is also coming in? Like, why you described the why for the person who was cheated on, but for the cheater, the why, like what was maybe missing?
So as we were talking about that, I was thinking about how one of the things that's really important with this, when you're working, like when you're working with a couple in this situation, if you're working with a couple, you want to make sure that you have releases to both of their individual therapists, because there you may also, you're going to get, it's sort of like, I think about it as like bringing in a support team for a couple, and you want them to know that you are you and their individual therapists are 100% working on holding them. So you're wanting to talk to whomever the cheater's therapist is
And
about.
you're not ever in that role, are you? I mean, I'm just curious, like you're not working as an individual and as a couples therapist. Like what are the ethics around that?
The only time I'm doing that is when I'm doing this co-counseling piece, where I'm working with both the individual and the couple. That's the
And
only
then you're
time.
referring out. You're like, you'd be
Yeah.
good if you're an individual, each of you.
No, 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 no. That is way too dynamically like,
Complex.
oh my God. I can't imagine any therapist wanting to do all of that.
It's too much.
No. Well, we're already talking about betrayals, right? And infidelity. And if you're seeing one person and you're seeing the couple, or if you're trying to see both people and seeing the couple, it I don't know that you can really heal a betrayal, attachment betrayals in that sort of scenario. It just, to me, it's set up for, I'd much rather just talk to other therapists than try to navigate all of that.
Sure. And just another question, because this came up recently. I was talking to another therapist who is in a different state, so I think their regulations might be different. But would you be seeing two individuals individually that are in relationship with one another, or do you also not do that in your practice?
Oh. Um, I don't think I would. Like a couple would come in, but I would see them individually,
Well,
but
it's like
not
you're
as
not
a
even seeing
couple.
the couple, you're just seeing two individuals, but they're in relationship with each other.
Oh, and I don't know about it?
And you do know about it. Would you see that?
No, I don't think I would do that.
I don't think so either. I was just talking to a therapist from a different state, and I think the regulations are different. But here in Colorado, we're not really seeing people individually that we're also seeing in couples. We're not seeing individuals that are also, it's just, it's good to have the separation for the
I
reason
think
you're describing.
I think it is really. But I also, I can also consider that there might be, if you're working in a smaller town, if there are fewer therapists around, there might be some other reasons why that would sort of happen.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't. That seems way too complicated for me.
Yeah,
Way
absolutely.
too. Yeah. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like I could be really in the service of a couple. Now, what I did have, I want to make sure we get to the last stage before our time is up, but I want to tell this really funny story where a couple came to see me and they sat down on my couch. And the first thing they said was, um, well, we're together, but we're not, well, we're married, but we're not married to each other. And I was like, okay. They came in as a couple. They were both married to other people. And I was like, okay, that's first. And we all kind of giggled about it
Were they
because
a poly couple?
no,
Oh, it was okay. It was a
no,
secret.
they were each cheating on their partners, on their married partners. Mhm. But long story short is they are now married and living very happily together. So they were both, one was very clearly on the way out of his marriage, and the other was somewhat ambivalent, but and it was really interesting and sweet, and it was great to be able to support them in that because they really needed support. They were really in love and they wanted to be together and they knew that. And so anyway, yeah, you never know what's going to show up.
You never know. You never know. And you can't assume. I mean, this is one thing I'm really trying to work with our students around. You can't assume the type of relationship that people are in, the configuration. There's so many different diverse setups for.
Yes. Yes, there are. There are. And again, so let me say the last
Yes.
part about the steps and then I'll say more about that other piece. But so after, one of the things that's also happening in the insights is actually getting people to do what we started off talking about, were these concepts of monogamy and non-monogamy, and that really the folks in non-monogamy have a much better way of talking about what it is, what it means, as opposed to people who are just sort of assuming monogamy.
Mhm.
and making assumptions about it. Those folks really haven't spent a lot of time talking about what is it? What does it mean? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to us? What is the, and in Esther Perel's work, the last phase is sort of the vision. And what is it that we want now going forward? What do we want? What's important to us? What are our values? Have our values shifted? If they have shifted, restating them, maybe sometimes for the first time,
Mhm.
actually unpacking this whole idea about attraction and monogamy and infidelity and security and attachment, and helping people just step into this new relationship, this new marriage, this new experience of each other with a really different mindset, with a really
Because in
different.
many ways, it is a brand new relationship. It's like their relationship has begun again in some way.
Yes.
So letting them know that whatever formulation they were in before it's gone. It's
Right.
died.
Mm-hmm.
Their
Mm-hmm.
past version of
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And
So,
so it's
so in this
like,
case, are you
hey,
looking?
hey, Judy, meet Jim, it's sort of that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And in this phase, are you supporting them with the vision of what does their sexuality look like now? What is their relationship to intimacy with one another now? Is this sort of where you're bringing in? Because that piece needs to be repaired too.
Ooh, yeah, that piece does need to be repaired. Um, I think that most of the couples I've worked with require um, being more, certainly more in a later stage of what I would say the insight stage is, to really even begin to have that conversation.
Mhm.
Um, because it there has to be some level of rebuilt connection and some restabilized foundational ability to then step into this very vulnerable piece.
Mhm.
Now, some people cheat because they got some attention paid to them, and it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the sexual, I wouldn't even call it intimacy, just the sexual experience that was had.
Mhm.
um, I have worked with a lot of women who have not really explored their sexuality in a way that they could really speak to, that feel so insecure and so freaked out and upset and scared that somehow that blonde woman is so much better than me. Um, and so that it's a big conversation that then sort of opens up this whole other really intimate, vulnerable conversation, but again, really necessary. So, sometime in the second half of an insight phase, if a couple really hasn't brought it in, then it's my job to
Mhm.
sort of introduce it as, we probably need to talk about this.
Mhm.
And then, and also on the heels of that, too, we talk about what does it mean to reconnect with each other sexually. Now, some folks, in all of their upset, dive right back into sex, and maybe it's because that sort of physical embodied sense of connection is really important. More than likely at some point it's going to come up again.
Mhm.
Once the emotion kind of settles, it'll come up again as something that needs to be discussed. Sometimes it doesn't get talked about at all. Right now I'm working with this couple, and she doesn't want to talk about the sex part,
Mhm.
and it makes it really difficult. I think she has a lot of feelings about it. She has a lot of beliefs that somehow, I don't know, she's also cheated before too. So it's a talk about don't have any assumptions.
Yeah.
They both have, there's been a lot of infidelity on both sides.
Mhm. Yeah, which is so interesting. And it's not always, I mean, I'll just say, like in my experience, it's not always the woman who's related to sexual shame. Like in this one couple I'm working with right now, as we start to talk about sex, I can just see him. He actually sits on his hands like this.
Yeah.
And he's actually in this example, he's the cheater, but no language around sexuality or what it means in the context of the relationship, like no capacity to like explore what the needs are. So
Yes. And my client, who I was just talking about, his sexual shame is that um, he has this really alive, vibrant sexuality, but he always ends up with these women who shut that down. Like it's almost too much. They don't want to hear about it. And it happened in his first marriage and it's happening here again. So he always ends up squashing it, like somehow. And he's, it's not like he's got something that's out of the realm of sort of what we might call normal. He just likes sex and he feels ashamed about that. So, yeah.
So that's more, so you're working on that in the latter side of the insight phase and then also in this vision phase. But also, what I'm hearing in terms of the vision is, who are we now? What are our values as a couple? What do we want to be moving into as we move forward into in this new version of ourselves? What are our new ways of being?
Yes. And one of the other things I think is really important with that is that when we look at the whys, it is that. So if you notice you're out in the world and someone is paying you attention and it feels really good in a way that doesn't feel quite right, I want you to go home. I want you to go to your partner and say, oh my God, this thing happened today where somebody just said something really nice to me or complimented me on how I looked, and it did something that doesn't feel right. And I want to tell you about it because I want you to meet this need. I want to bring this need here. I want to tell you that I need you to notice me. I need you to tell me that I look fantastic or that you love my smile. I need that from you. I don't need it from out there. And that's the healing, the willingness to say, I have a need. And
Yeah.
I want you to meet it.
Yeah.
I don't want some random person who, tells me that I look great.
Which
To
may
me.
be very counterintuitive to the cheater, who might be really living in a space of secrecy and shame in some way. So to actually be voicing needs and voicing, someone was attracted to me and it lit me up. I mean, scary, it can be very scary for that person to lean into, but
Yes. Yes. Yes.
we've talked so much and we're almost at time. I'm wondering if there's any last bits, Deb, that you want to share.
Mm. Um, I want to say that if you like doing couples work, that it is really important to focus on this. It's really important to think about how to deepen your own knowledge base around working with infidelity. It happens a lot. It has fueled my practice for many years now. There's a lot of pain around it in our culture, and people need somebody that they can trust to sort of hold it. So if you're even remotely interested in doing couples work, really consider what it means to get educated around this piece. And there are key people out there. Esther Perel is one, Tammy Nelson is another person. There's some people that are doing really brilliant work that are willing to share processes and structure that can be really helpful. Um, you have to have some desire to sit with some intensity. Um, And the other thing I want to say too is that you guys know, the class knows that there are a lot of different models of doing couples therapy, and all models sort of will tackle this, but maybe not necessarily in the depth that someone like Esther Perel or Tammy Nelson do. So you find your model. I studied emotionally focused therapy, but you find your model, PACT, whatever it is, Gottman. Find your model, embrace the model, learn what the model has to say about working with infidelity, and then go search for more information. That's my bit of advice to anybody that's really wanting to do couples work.
Yeah.
And that goes for anything, all of the other issues. You find your base, you find the model that feels good to you, and then you deepen your knowledge about what else is there around this thing.
Yeah. And different models and different ways of working are going to probably work really differently depending on the couple that you're with and who you're working with. So having that breadth of knowledge is so important.
So important. So important. And let's say one other thing is to be a good sex therapist is also to be a good couples therapist. So, it doesn't necessarily matter which comes first, but probably good to have both. And thank
Wonderful.
you. Mhm.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Deb, for your time. And
Yeah.
um, if people want to reach out to you for therapy or for supervision, I know those are both areas that you specialize in. How can people get a hold of you?
You can give them my email address is
Okay,
basically my name, Deb Azorski at Gmail, Azorsky. I
great.
should have a thing that I hold up, but
Yeah. Well, I think it's right here at the bottom of your
oh,
screen.
is it? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Make sure they get it too.
Okay. Or I could put it in the chat. Oh no, I don't know that you were.
I don't know if it'll record the chat.
Yeah,
I'll be sure they get it.
yeah. Just give them my email's best.
Okay, great.
Mhm,
Thank you
mhm.
so much.
Jenna, thanks. Thank you. It's a great way to do this.
Yeah.
Mm.